This is the story of a great king that pretended to be dead, so as to discover those plotting against him. Watch full the end. The great King Obinna of Umun's kingdom was a man of wisdom and foresight. For many years, he ruled with fairness, but he often lay awake at night, troubled by a single thought: did his people truly love and respect him, or were they only loyal because of his power? He had heard whispers in the palace corridors, talk of greedy chiefs, impatient princes, and even his own trusted advisors secretly plotting for more wealth. But words alone were not enough. He needed to see the truth with his own eyes. One evening, as the crimson sun sank behind the hills, King Obinna called for his most trusted servant, Chibuzo. "Chibuzo, my heart is restless," the king said, his deep voice calm but firm. "I fear that my kingdom is filled with wolves in sheep's clothing." Chibuzo bowed low. "My king, what do you wish to do?" The king's lips curled into a knowing smile. "I will die." Chibuzo's head shot up in shock. "My king. The gods forbid such a thing." "Not truly, you fool," Obinna chuckled, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "I will pretend to be dead. I want to see the hearts of men when they think I am gone." At first, Chibuzo hesitated. Such a thing had never been done before. But he knew his king was wise beyond measure. "As you wish, my king," he said at last. And so, the plan was set into motion. The next morning, a great wail erupted from the palace. The town crier ran through the streets, his voice trembling as he declared, "Our beloved King Obinna has joined." The people of Umun's gasped in disbelief. The mighty king, gone. Women tore their wrappers in sorrow, and men pounded their fists against their chests. The marketplace fell silent, and the sound of mourning filled the air. But within the palace, things were very different. The chiefs, who had always sworn loyalty to the king, gathered in a secret chamber. Chief Ibuka, the oldest and most cunning of them all, sneered. Finally, he muttered, rubbing his hands together, "That old man ruled for too long. Now, we can divide the kingdom's wealth among ourselves." The other chiefs nodded eagerly. "Let us take the royal treasury," Chief Ifani suggested, his greedy eyes gleaming. "The gold, the ivory, the sacred artifacts, all of it shall be ours." Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Prince Namdi, the king's only son, sat drinking palm wine with his friends. His lips curled into a lazy smile. "Why should I mourn?" he slurred, gulping down another calabash. "The throne belongs to me now. And when I am king, I shall do as I please." His friends cheered. No more rules. No more discipline. The kingdom will be a place of pleasure and feasting. Even Queen Adewora, the king's beloved wife, found herself cast aside. The chiefs ignored her cries, and the servants who once bowed at her feet now treated her like a mere widow. All this time, deep inside the royal chamber, King Obinna lay still in his wooden casket, his heart pounding with rage. He heard Everett. Then came the day of his burial. The entire kingdom gathered at the palace courtyard. The priests chanted ancestral hymns. The warriors prepared to carry the casket to the sacred burial grounds. But as they lifted the casket onto their shoulders, a dark cloud swept across the sky. The wind howled like an angry spirit. The people murmured, uneasy. And then, it happened. A deep voice rumbled from inside the casket. "Who dares bury me alive?" A terrible silence fell. The warriors froze. The chief's eyes bulged. Women screamed. Children wailed. Before anyone could move, the lid of the casket burst open. And there he was, King Obinna, rising like a spirit from the grave. His eyes blazed with fury, his royal robes untouched by death. The air crackled with power as he stepped out of the casket, his voice thundering across the courtyard. "You thought I was dead, and so you showed your true colors." The chiefs collapsed to their knees, wailing in fear. Prince Namdi stumbled backward, his face pale. Queen Adewora gasped, tears rolling down her cheeks, not from fear, but from relief. Obinna turned to the chiefs first. "You thieves," he roared. "You sought to devour my kingdom before my body was even cold. You betrayed the throne, and now, you shall face justice." The guards, who had once hesitated, now sprang into action. They seized the corrupt chiefs, dragging them to the palace dungeons as they screamed for mercy. Then, the king turned to his son. And you, Namdi." His voice was softer, but filled with disappointment. "You are no longer my heir. A king must be worthy of the throne, and you have shown nothing but greed and foolishness." Namdi fell to his knees, sobbing. "Father, please. I was blinded by youth and foolishness." Obinna stared at him for a long moment before speaking. "You will not be executed. But from today, you are no longer a prince. You shall live among the commoners and learn the true meaning of leadership." Prince Namdi bowed his head in shame. "I accept my punishment, father." The king turned to his people. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. A kingdom ruled by greed and betrayal will fall, but a kingdom ruled by wisdom and honor will flourish." The people erupted into cheers, chanting his name, their faith in their king restored. From that day forward, no one in Umans dared to betray the throne, for they knew even in death, King Obinna would always be watching. That night, the palace was silent, but the weight of what had happened still hung in the air like a thick fog. The great halls, once filled with deceit and greed, now trembled under the restored authority of King Obinna, the ruler who returned from the grave. Seated upon his throne, the king gazed at the faces before him, his loyal advisors, the repentant servants, and the warriors who had stood by him. But his heart was not at ease. He had seen the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of his kingdom, and he knew that mere punishment was not enough. Justice had been served, yes, but there was still a kingdom to rebuild. He raised his hand, and the murmurs ceased. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of 1,000 storms. From this day forward, Umans shall be ruled not by blood alone, but by wisdom, honor, and the will of the people. The elders and nobles exchanged glances. This was unheard of. The throne had always passed from father to son. But after what they had witnessed, who would dare challenge the king's decision? Obinna continued, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. A great ruler must first be a great servant. He must understand the burdens of his people, the struggles of the farmers, the cries of the weak, and the sacrifices of the warriors. Only then can he wear the crown. He turned to his son, Prince Namdi, who remained on his knees, eyes filled with regret. "You have lost your right to the throne, but you still have a chance to reclaim your honor." Namdi looked up, his lips trembling. "Father, I will do whatever it takes to prove myself worthy." The king's face was unreadable. "Then you shall go to the farthest village in our kingdom. There, you will work as a common man. You will farm the land, fetch water, and live without royal privilege. If you return after 5 years and have truly changed, you may have the chance to serve Umans, not as a prince, but as a leader chosen by the people." Gasps filled the hall. 5 years among the commoners. It was a fate worse than exile for a man born in luxury. But Namdi did not argue. He bowed low before his father. "I accept my punishment, and I will prove myself." The king nodded, then turned to his warriors. "Take him at dawn. Let him learn the true weight of responsibility." With that, the matter was settled. The prince would leave, and the kingdom would begin its transformation. But the king's work was not yet done. The next morning, he gathered the elders, warriors, and those who had remained loyal. He would not let the kingdom fall into corruption again. "There will be a council," he declared, "a circle of wise men and women who will serve as the voice of the people. No decision shall be made without their counsel, and the next ruler shall be chosen by them, not simply by birthright, but by worthiness." The people, once unsure, now saw the wisdom in his words. They had seen firsthand how easily power could corrupt. The idea of a council, of a kingdom ruled with balance and fairness, gave them hope. The laws were rewritten. The old ways, which allowed greed to fester unchecked, were cast aside. And as the months passed, Umans flourished. Those who had plotted against the throne spent their days in labor, forced to rebuild what they had sought to destroy. Prince Namdi, far from the palace, worked under the scorching sun, learning humility in ways he had never imagined. And King Obinna. He ruled with wisdom sharper than any sword, his name whispered with both fear and respect. For the people of Umans knew one thing for certain: their king had faced death and returned, and he would always be watching. Years passed, and the kingdom of Umans grew stronger under the rule of King Obinna and his newly formed council. Justice reigned, and the people flourished. The markets bustled with trade, the farmlands produced abundant harvests, and peace settled over the land like the calm after a mighty storm. But far from the palace, in the quiet village of Aguanta, a lone man labored under the scorching sun. His hands, once soft from a life of luxury, were now hardened by years of toil. Prince Namdi was no longer a prince, but a farmer, a fisherman, a builder, and a servant to the very people he had once ignored. At first, life in the village had been unbearable. He struggled to carry heavy bundles of firewood, his feet blistered from walking miles to fetch water, and his stomach rumbled from the meager meals he had to earn with his own sweat. The villagers mocked him at first, calling him the fallen prince. But with time, something remarkable happened. Namdi listened. He learned. He changed. He sat with the elders and absorbed their wisdom. He worked side by side with the farmers, planting and harvesting under the sun. He helped fishermen pull their heavy nets from the river and felt the joy of honest labor. When sickness swept through the village, he did not hide behind wealth, he carried medicine from one hut to another, caring for the weak. Gone was the arrogant prince who had once drowned himself in palm wine and greed. In his place stood a man who knew the struggles of the people, the pain of hardship, and the true meaning of leadership. 5 years passed like a whisper in the wind. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, an old messenger from the palace arrived at the village. He found Namdi washing his hands after a long day's work. "The king has called for you," the old man said, his eyes scanning Namdi's rugged appearance, the once royal robes now replaced with simple, worn cloth. Namdi dried his hands and nodded. "I am ready." The journey back to Umans was long, but this time, he did not travel as a prince returning to his throne, he traveled as a man who had earned his place among his people. When he arrived at the palace gates, the guards almost did not recognize him. His face was leaner, his eyes sharper, and his steps carried purpose. The great hall was filled with nobles, elders, and warriors when he entered. At the center of it all sat King Obina, his father, the man who had sent him away in disgrace. A deep silence settled over the room. All eyes were on the fallen prince who had returned. King Obina studied his son carefully. "You have been gone for 5 years," the king said, his voice steady. "Tell me, what have you learned?" Namdi did not kneel. He did not rush to beg for his title. Instead, he stood tall and spoke from his heart. "I have learned that a leader is nothing without his people," he said. "That power is not a right, but a responsibility. That hunger, pain, and struggle are not things to be ignored, but things to be understood." He turned to the council, to the elders, to the warriors. "If I am to serve this kingdom, it will not be as a prince who demands loyalty, but as a servant who earns it." A murmur of approval spread through the hall. Even the council members who had doubted him nodded in respect. King Obina's face remained unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he stood from his throne and took slow steps toward his son. He placed a heavy hand on Namdi's shoulder. "You left here as a boy," the king said, his voice softer now. "But you have returned as a man. And for that, I am proud." A slow smile spread across his face. "You may not reclaim the title of prince, for our laws have changed. But if the council deems you worthy, you may serve the people in a position of leadership." The council did not hesitate. One by one, they rose and declared, "He is worthy." The crowd erupted in cheers. That day, Namdi was not restored as a prince, he became a leader chosen by the people. Under his father's guidance, he helped rule Umans with wisdom, fairness, and the deep understanding that true power lies in service, not in greed. And so, the kingdom flourished for generations to come, forever remembering the lesson of the king who returned from the dead, and the prince who rose from the ashes. As the years passed, Umans prospered under the leadership of King Obina and his son, Namdi. The land grew fertile, the people thrived, and the palace no longer echoed with the whispers of betrayal. But power attracts enemies, and beyond the borders of Umans, jealous eyes watched. One night, as the full moon bathed the kingdom in silver light, a shadow crept across the palace walls. It moved swiftly, unseen, until it reached the chambers of Chief Ibuka, the disgraced former chief who had once plotted to steal the throne. Ibuka, now a frail man, sat hunched over a wooden table, grinding bitter herbs. He had spent years in exile, stripped of his power, his riches, his dignity. But his heart still burned with hatred. A voice hissed from the darkness. "Do you wish to reclaim what was stolen from you?" Ibuka turned sharply. A tall figure, cloaked in black, stepped forward. His skin was painted with strange markings, and his eyes gleamed like burning coal. A sorcerer. Ibuka's lips trembled. Who are you? The stranger's smile was slow, deliberate. I am a messenger of King Gideover of Nri. He has heard of Yumun's riches, its power, its newfound wisdom. And he wishes to claim it as his own. Ibuka's breath quickened. A war was coming. You were once a great chief, the sorcerer continued, his voice smooth as silk. But you were cast aside. Help us, and you shall have your revenge. Ibuka's hands curled into fists. Revenge. The word tasted sweet on his tongue. What must I do? He whispered. The sorcerer leaned in, his voice like the wind before a storm. Betray your kingdom one last time. Days passed in peace, but the enemy moved in silence. One fateful night, as the villagers slept, a distant drumbeat echoed from the hills. Slow. Steady. Ominous. The warriors of Yumun stirred, their hands gripping their spears. Then, without warning, fire erupted in the eastern farmlands. Screams pierced the night. Women and children ran as flames licked the sky, swallowing huts and crops. Horses galloped through the darkness, carrying warriors clad in black, their faces painted for war. The kingdom was under attack. King Obina stood atop the palace walls, his heart pounding like the war drums that now filled the air. The Nri warriors were skilled, their numbers vast, and worst of all, they had help from within. His eyes darkened. Ibuka. He had once given the men a chance to live, and now, the old traitor had led the enemy to his doorstep. Summon the warriors. Obina commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. Within moments, Yumun's warriors surged forward, blades gleaming under the moonlight. Prince Namdi, no longer the arrogant boy of the past, rode at the front lines. His hands gripped his spear, his heart steady. This was his kingdom. He would not let it fall. The battle was fierce. The air thickened with the clash of metal, the cries of the wounded, the scent of burning wood. But Yumun's warriors fought like lions. King Obina, despite his age, wielded his sword with the strength of a man half his years. Beside him, Namdi fought like a warrior who had nothing to lose and everything to protect. The tide of battle turned when the people of Yumun's, farmers, traders, even the women, rose up to defend their home. By dawn, the enemy had been driven back. Their banners lay torn, their warriors either dead or retreating into the hills. And Ibuka. He was found among the dead, his betrayal had led him to an unmarked grave. The victory was great, but it came at a cost. King Obina, the wise ruler who had once returned from the grave, had been wounded. He sat on the palace steps, blood staining his royal robes, his breath shallow. The people gathered around him, their faces stricken with grief. Namdi knelt beside his father, his hands shaking. Father, stay with me. We still need you. Obina smiled weakly. No, my son. My time is done. The crowd wept, for they knew what was coming. The king took a deep breath and placed a heavy, blood-stained hand on his son's shoulder. You have proven yourself, Namdi. You were once a prince unworthy of the throne. But now, you are a man the gods themselves would be proud of. Lead them well. With those final words, King Obina, the man who had ruled with wisdom, who had seen both betrayal and redemption, closed his eyes for the last time. The great ruler of Yumun's was no more. Morning swept across the land, but as the sun set, the people gathered in the palace courtyard. The council stood before them, the elders whispering in low voices. Then, as the sky darkened, the eldest council member stepped forward. The throne is empty, he said, his voice solemn. And yet, there is but one man who has proven himself worthy. His gaze turned to Namdi. You have learned humility. You have fought for your people. You have served without greed, and you have led without fear. By the will of the gods, and the voice of Yumun's, we deck. A great cheer rose into the air. Namdi, once a foolish prince, now stood before his people as King Namdi, the ruler chosen not by birth, but by destiny. He took the throne, not with arrogance, but with a vow to protect his people, to uphold his father's legacy, and to ensure that Yumun's would never fall to darkness again. For years to come, the tale of King Obina and the fallen prince would be told around the fires at night. A story of a king who tested his people by pretending to die. A story of betrayal and redemption. A story of a foolish prince who became a great king. And as long as the people of Umans remembered their past, they would never again let greed and betrayal rule their hearts. For they knew that even in death, the spirit of King Obinna would always be watching. We have gotten to the end of this story. If you enjoy this story, kindly like, subscribe and comment your opinion. God bless you.